So in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about how to take portraits of celebrities. I'm not going to cover how you get your career into a position where you're able to take photographs of celebrities, as that's a different matter. We're more concerned with career development, building a portfolio, a client base, and so on. No, today I actually want to talk to you about the nitty-gritty of how you actually go about making a portrait of a well-known person, or celebrity if you prefer that term. Now before I get stuck in, I just want to address a concern you've probably got. If you're never likely to end up taking portraits of celebrities, then why on earth should you care about how to do it? Good point, well made, but the truth is that the difference between a portrait of a celebrity and someone else is largely just a matter of pressure. The techniques and approaches that will enable you to handle the pressure of a celebrity portrait will mean that other portraits become that little bit easier too. And who knows, if one day one of your goals is to actually end up shooting celebrities, then by applying these ideas to your own portraits, maybe those shots will get so good that before too long you find yourself in a position where you're being asked to shoot celebrities. I'm not making any promises, mind you, but it definitely holds true that what works at one end of the scale will still work at the other. And just quickly, before I come on to the actual tactics and tips, what gives me the right to talk about any of this? Well, I've shot quite a few celebrities in my time. Probably in total more than a couple of hundred over the past 20 years or so, including lots of A-listers like Richard Branson, Mo Farah, Anthony Joshua, Rory McIlroy, along with a couple of prime ministers, as well as stacks and stacks of fairly well-known but not quite as recognisable names, mostly from the world of sports, which has long been my area of speciality. So although celebrity portraiture isn't my main thing, I've done a fair bit of it. Right. Let's get on to some actual suggestions rather than just boasting or making abstract points. The biggest difference between being asked to take a celebrity portrait and a portrait of someone less well known is usually pressure, as I've mentioned. This pressure will come in a variety of forms and is really just a concentrated version of what happens when you take any portrait. Even when you're snapping your mates, there's still a tiny amount of pressure to get an image that you're happy with or that they're happy with. You'll often have some sort of time constraint or lack some ideal piece of equipment, even under what seems like relaxed conditions. Photographing a celebrity simply ramps all of this up. Now this pressure comes along because your client, whether it's a magazine, a website, a commercial client of some sort, will almost certainly feel that this is an important shoot due to the celebrity involvement. It may have taken them a long time to arrange, and they may have had to negotiate with the celebrity, or more likely their agent, manager for a long time. There may be a substantial amount of money on the table in forms of sponsorship or endorsement money, and the imagery you're going to be providing might be a key part of the client getting their money's worth. Now this anxiety from the client side creates your first set of pressure. Then you'll often get pressure from the celebrity side, or more often not from them, but from some person on their team. That could be a PR, PA, agent or manager. They may try and restrict the amount of time you've got with them. They get be fussy about the location or be very strict about what the celebrity will and won't do on camera. When you also factor in all the things that can go wrong anyway on a shoot, technical failures, bad weather, traffic delays, it's very easy to understand just how pressured celebrity shoots can get. Now, as an idea of what sort of pressure I'm talking about, I've photographed celebrities in under a minute on several occasions. And these weren't paparazzi-style grabbed on the street shots. These were pre-arranged and agreed shoots where the celeb in question was either late, grumpy, or their handlers just kept changing their minds. Or, as is quite common, the time I was allocated with the celebrity was part of a bigger media day, and I was perhaps one of half a dozen people who'd photographed or interviewed them that day, and I was right towards the end of the day. If you find yourself in this situation, and particularly if you're at the end of the day, be very wary indeed. The celebrity is likely to be very bored and quite tired by this point. Don't be surprised if your time slot has shrunk due to everyone else overrunning, and that your ideas are met with, "Can we just do the shoot right here? I can't be asked to go anywhere." I've also had to work in dozens of less than ideal locations, usually bland meeting rooms in hotels, and I'm expected by my client to still come up with something exciting, or even a whole range of shots. The idea that all celebrity shoots take place in large photographic studios or exotic locations is very far from the truth, I'm afraid. Combine limited time with a limited space and add these demands and the pressure to deliver is quite high. I'll come on to a specific trick as to how to get around this later on, but now let's get on to some basic advice. Now, I was a Boy Scout, which probably doesn't surprise you, and their motto, of course, is be prepared. It also ought to be the motto for any celebrity photographers out there, as preparation will help relieve so much of the pressure I've just been describing. The first bit of preparation is the most basic. Working from the brief that you've got from your client, go through your gear, check you've got everything you need, and if not, beg, borrow or hire bits you haven't got. Then check it's all working okay, it's fully charged, cleaned, prepped, etc. And now move on to the basic production work for the shoot. Find out as much as you can about the location, how you'll get there, how big it is, how well lit, what about parking, is there anything special about it you can make use of, is it near anywhere you know really well that might make a better location or a backup location. Work with your client to discuss your ideas along with their needs and their ideas, which hopefully will have been communicated to the celebrity in some way, although this happens remarkably rarely. Get the basic ideas sorted and planned out before you start to get elaborate ambitious. The chance to work with a recognisable person can be a great boost to your portfolio, and obviously you ought to make every effort possible to come away with some really memorable, distinctive and impressive imagery from the shoot. However, whilst it would be great to come home with a truly amazing and creative image, your client is expecting something usable from the shoot. And if all they get are lots of very confusing shots where you are playing around with your lighting, you may find they don't call you too often. I would always suggest that you get the safety shots in the bag first. The shots the client definitely needs, which are high priority, that's the cover image, the branded image, whatever they may be, before you start to play around and get ambitious. Now, if you're shooting for some sort of sponsorship deal or similar, your client should be responsible for things like branded clothing the celebrity is expected to wear, so you can usually leave all of that to them. But it is worth knowing ahead of time that you might need to allow for things like outfit changes or allow space for certain props and certain things in shot. The next thing I'd suggest, unless you already know the celebrity in question in enormous depth, is that you do some basic research on them. Not only is this polite, it's a good idea to express an interest in them and what they do, but it can give you some great talking points to get started with them, as well as perhaps flagging up areas that will be definite no-go areas. One of the most important things when taking any portrait is establishing some sort of connection and rapport with your subject, and this is even more acute when you've got merely minutes with them. This research should be the start of your talking points. I've always found it best to discuss their work rather than just outright flatter and praise them. They're quite used to hearing, "You were awesome in that thing you did," but less often do they hear something like, "How hard was it training for event X," or learning to do that tricky accent, or whatever it might be. If you can demonstrate that you've gone beyond what most people know about them, you'll have them on side almost immediately. Likewise, research will flag up areas that you really should avoid. Now, I'd always suggest steering clear of controversial topics anyway if you're trying to get a connection with somebody in a short space of time. But if your research brings up areas that they clearly aren't going to want to talk about, then really just don't go there. It's not worth it. So we've done our research and all our basic production preparation, and now we come to the day of the shoot. Big tip number 1, get there early. As I've said a few times already, your time with them is likely to be severely limited, so don't hamper yourself further by getting there with only minutes to spare. Get to the location with enough time to be fully set up and ready to go the minute your slot with them starts. I can't stress this enough. So much of your preparation before the shoot and on the day should be aiming towards a point where the celebrity walks on set, greets people, perhaps spends 5 minutes in hair and makeup, and then just walks straight in front of your camera and gets on with the job. You shouldn't still be building the set or lighting it or deciding which camera to use when they arrive. Getting to the location with enough time to spare should allow you to get control of the situation. You can set up as much as you need to and work out a plan for all the various shots you want to get and communicate this plan clearly to everyone involved. Your client, your assistant if you have one, along with other personnel like a makeup artist or a location manager. The more complex the shoot and the wider the range of images you need to produce, the more this setup time becomes important. In a perfect world, you want to have almost a dress rehearsal. of the entire shoot and walk through the various setups you'll use. If you're likely to change location during the shoot, get that worked out ahead of time. On dozens of occasions, I've shot in a hotel and I've been assigned a bland meeting room, which is absolutely fine for a blank background shot, but there are usually much more interesting locations around. And a few questions during this setup time to the hotel duty manager often yields great results. Then when the shoot starts, once the safety shots in the blank background are in the bag, it's off to the rooftop terrace, the penthouse suite, or wherever it might be for more interesting shots. Now, as part of this run-through before the real shoot, you ought to use a stand-in or stand-ins to get the framing and lighting all set up before the real subject arrives. This habit is ancient and pretty standard practice for professionals right across the board. As I said earlier, get things as set up and precise as they possibly can be before the real person arrives on set. That way you can start shooting straight away, get a feel for how everything will look, and flag up any potential problems. I do this all the time, either using an assistant or, if I don't have one, any other spare body. And I've got a stack of Polaroids of myself from my assisting days when I stood in for all sorts of people. Now, whilst a test shoot is a very sensible thing to do, make sure you're testing as close to the real shot as possible. If the person you use for a stand-in is 5'4" and the celebrity is an entire foot taller, you may find you need to adjust the lighting, or even your shooting position. Also, be aware of issues that may appear when the celebrity arrives on set. I've had several occasions when people are either contractually obliged to wear baseball caps or just don't want to take them off. Now, this may mean that you need to adjust your lighting, particularly if it's very toppy in nature, as it will shade their face. You may also need to make subtle adjustments if they're wearing particularly dark or light or shiny clothing. And as a general rule, the more elaborate your lighting setup, the more constrained it will be. And whilst it might make for a more impressive image, under a pressured situation, you're usually safer designing a lighting rig that allows you a bit more freedom of movement. And the last really practical tip I want to offer, whilst I'm still talking about equipment and setups, is know what you're doing with all of your kit, or at least appear to. During the shoot, mucking about with things, fiddling with settings, forever chimping off the back of the camera, and generally looking like you don't know what you're doing, will not make the celebrity feel very confident in you, and that's a bad thing. As I said earlier, prep your gear, make sure it's all working, but beyond that, make sure you know what it all does, and have backup plans in case something stops working. Get very familiar with what certain light setups do, and ideally have a few tried and tested approaches that you can create when your plan A has failed or not been allowed to work. Let's say you're planning to shoot with a large, soft light from one side, but a clumsy assistant snaps the rods in a softbox. Right, well, there are a wide variety of ways you can make a soft light from one side, and you should be able to smoothly and quickly switch to a different method rather than panicking because your softbox is broken. Now we come to the more esoteric bit, dealing with the psychological side of shooting famous people. Now, of the many famous people that I've photographed over the years, I can fairly say that less than 10% of them were very difficult, rude, unprofessional and hard to work with. 10% were simply amazing and left me with a warm glow and a renewed faith in human nature. And 80% were just polite, professional and got the job done. Pretty much everyone in the public eye understands that part of their job is having their picture taken quite often or appearing at sponsors' events when they'd rather be sitting by the pool. And as part of this, they expect you to behave like it's part of your job too, rather than going, "Oh my God, it's a celebrity and they just shook my hand, I'll never wash this hand again." Okay, you need to behave professionally. Now obviously getting over this nerve problem improves with time as the novelty wears off. The way to get better at behaving normally is simply to build confidence in yourself as a photographer, and you do that by getting better at your craft and practicing stuff until you can do it easily and quickly under pressure. And this, of course, goes back to all that preparation we talked about. If you're really feeling anxious before a particular shoot, try doing a dry run at home, as much as space, time and personnel will permit. You won't be able to mimic exactly what might happen on the day, but you'll be able to increase your confidence a bit and possibly even flag up potential stumbling blocks. Don't be surprised when a celebrity turns up with several people in tow. Some celebrity shoots can become very crowded once you factor in people from your side, so yourself, an assistant, your client, hair and makeup, the stylist and so on, and their side, which might be agents, managers, friends, family. Try not to let this distract you. And remember the golden rule of photographing people. There's only room for one ego on set, and that's the ego in front of the camera. Leave your ego at the door. Be prepared to flatter, but don't simper. As I said earlier, talk about what they're doing rather than simply going, "I loved you in that film, you were really cool." Ask intelligent questions about them because you did research them, didn't you? And if you're able to, bring something in from your own experience. You might have worked with someone they know well, or your mum might be their biggest fan and would have always wanted to know X, Y, and Z. But above all, remain professional and make sure this extends to your crew, your appearance, and even your kit. Now, once you're behind the camera and shooting, I generally find it's best to keep chatting to some extent. Make sure any language that you use, and this is the same for any shots of people, is positive. Don't plant thoughts in their mind that they might not be looking their best. Always try and find a positive way of phrasing something. If they're sitting in a way that's giving them a double chin, don't say, "Sit up straight, you're getting a double chin." Okay, because that will draw attention to that negative thing. Instead, say something like, "Oh, could you lift your head up for me and turn that way? It's better for the light." Okay, that won't introduce into their mind the idea that they're looking fat, because the minute that's in there, they're going to get paranoid about it. So always try and use positive reinforcing language. And although I find it helps to keep talking, if time is tight, I try and avoid asking them too many questions. People can look quite daft if you photograph them mid-speech. So in order for them to reply, you'll need to stop shooting. And that is going to eat into your limited time frame. The best advice I can offer, without wanting to sound too pretentious, is to behave a bit like a film director trying to get a good performance out of an actor. Give lots of suggestions, keep your language positive, and think of what they're doing in front of a camera as a performance. Now, if you put yourself in the shoes of a celebrity standing in a blank white studio with lots of lights and paraphernalia around and a small crowd, being asked to do something daft or very imaginative, you can see why direction from behind the camera can be so helpful. One quick extra note here, it's much easier for the person in front of the camera to have a clear idea of what's going on and what's wanted if just one person gives them direction. It's best if this is the photographer. Try and get others on set who may have ideas to communicate through you to the celebrity. Ideally, if you've talked through the whole shoot with your client beforehand, you should have a pretty good idea of how you need to direct them, so there should be no need for half a dozen people all shouting ideas out at once. This can get very confusing. One problem you may encounter is that while celebrities can be very easy to photograph in one respect, they're very used to being in front of camera, so they tend to be very confident in front of it, and they don't freeze up like Joe Public can. This can also mean that all you get is their usual canned response to being on camera. Some celebrities have a role they just play out time and again when they're on camera, and if it's all you've been tasked with getting, just some PR shots, then that's probably fine. If instead you've been tasked with getting something a bit more interesting and imaginative, then this pre-packaged response can be a bit of an obstacle to overcome. Now, I've usually got round this by getting all the safety shots in the bag first, can you sense a theme here, and letting the celebrity get comfortable with me and the situation, then start suggesting more interesting ideas I've got or that my client wants. They should by now be more confident that I know what I'm doing from my general behaviour and handling of the shoot. Express those ideas confidently and clearly. If you don't sound very certain of them, well, it doesn't sound like they're going to buy into it either. You know, if you don't think it's going to be really cool to do something different, then why should they get on board with it? They're unlikely to do anything that will make them look stupid, unless, of course, looking stupid is a main part of their act or their personality. Now, earlier, I went on and on about pressure, and how celebrity shoots are like a hothouse of egos, tight time frames and intensity. But I have to admit, happily, it's not always like that. Some of the most enjoyable shoots I've ever done have been celebrity shoots, usually with well-established people who didn't feel they needed their agents to come along and hold their hands, and who were very relaxed and at ease around the camera. Jobs like this are a reminder of what makes this career so fantastic, and I wish they happen more often, I really do. I will sound like I'm trying to brown nose or claim fame I don't deserve, but I have had the enormous pleasure of getting quite drunk with a few famous names over the years, usually, as it happens, comedians, and it can be quite a surreal experience to realise that the bloke you were watching on the telly just the other night, who you've idolised for ages, has just bought you a drink and is now telling very filthy jokes. At the other end of the scale, there are the celebrities who don't want to be there, are having a bad day, or their agents don't want them to be there, or they just aren't terribly pleasant human beings. Now, sadly, I've had my fair share of these too. You will notice at this point that the rolling ticker of images has disappeared because I don't want to get sued. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where the celebrity or their personnel are being very difficult, just don't want to take part, or place very tight restrictions on what you can do, or even, and I have had this happen, just up and leave, then my best suggestion is obviously remain professional. Keep it polite, try to hold on to your own ego, when perhaps what you want to do is say, sit there and stop acting like an infant. It's in case of these situations that I always suggest getting the safety shots in the bag first. So make sure you have clearly understood what the client desperately needs in that regard. If the absolute minimum they're after is a shot of the celebrity wearing branded clothing or standing in front of a banner, then make sure that's what you get, and get it first, so that if they do then throw their toys out the pram, you're still safe. Don't start mucking around with the experimental cutting-edge stuff first, as that might be all you get, and then the client won't be too happy. Now, before I wrap up, I hinted earlier that I had a specific trick to deal with the limited time available on celebrity shoots, particularly if you also have a lot of demands from the client. This is from a shoot about 4 years ago for Golf Monthly magazine with Rory McIlroy, and I'm going to expand upon it in much more detail in a future video, as there are so many things to unpack, and I've already been talking for quite a while. Some key facts are that we had half an hour with Rory, in which time we needed to conduct an interview, shoot a video for Facebook Live, and shoot 2 covers and enough imagery for 2 magazine features. We were in a meeting room in a hotel, which Nike had kindly fitted out with a 9-foot white paper background, and the short version, as I say, more detail in a video to come, is that we planned everything out beforehand, arrived 2 hours early, and built 3 sets, if you like, in the one room. 2 for stills and 1 for video. And then we went through a complete dress rehearsal beforehand. Still set 1 was a clean, white background setup for full-length shots, portraits, etc. Still setup 2 was a more dramatic, more moody lighting setup, and then the video setup was a simple headshot interview, framed up with the microphones all set up and ready to go. This much preparation meant that we absolutely nailed it, to be honest, and got everything required and more in our allocated half-hour slot. So, time to wrap it all up. Now, as I said right back at the beginning, talking about celebrity portraits might seem really esoteric when so few people will likely get to shoot them. But the principles apply through most types of photography, particularly portraiture. The extra pressure that often goes with a celebrity shoot merely emphasises how important good preparation is. Now, this preparation can be really practical stuff like kit and location scouting, or it can be more esoteric things like finding out about the celebrity themselves. Apply these same principles to whatever you're shooting, and I guarantee you that you'll start to see better images.